Shut up and sit down.
Hi, welcome to ctl-alt-del-church. This week I am joined by Diana Hall. Diana, it's great to have you along. Where in the world are you? Because it looks sunny.
It is sunny, it's lovely. I've come inside specially because all ministers do at the moment is sit outside drinking coffee, right? Yeah. So I'm in Dunbar in East Lothian, where I'm the rector of St Anne's Scottish Episcopal and Methodist Church.
Brilliant. How long have you been in St Anne's?
I arrived here in the summer of 2017, so nearly 3 years.
Excellent. Very good. So we've started mostly this conversation the week before lockdown, where we kind of knew that something was on the cards. We were all watching the news and disaster was happening and unfolding across Europe and thinking, oh, I wonder if that's going to happen here. So how did you spend that week?
So the week before lockdown, I was just coming out of my own lockdown. So I'd been ill 2 weeks before lockdown with something that I don't think was coronavirus, but like looking back, maybe it was. I don't know. I had a bit of a temperature and I was a bit fluey. And so I took a day or two off thinking, oh, I don't really want to pass this round folk. And just as I was coming out of that and about to go back to work halfway through the week, Boris Johnson said, if you've had a temperature, you need to stay at home for 7 days. And a little bit of me was like, all right then. So I missed Sunday the 16th, would that have been right? About then. I was off that day. I had to get a colleague to take the service for me. I came back on the 17th and went up to Edinburgh for a couple of meetings, and the place was just deserted. And I was like, well, this is very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't have that kind of standing in front of your congregation on the Sunday thinking, what on earth's going to happen now?
Not really. I mean, we had already changed some things, and we were having conversations in the background about changing others. So we'd had a conversation about the fact that we weren't going to serve biscuits that were unwrapped, that were not individually wrapped after the service. There'd already been a conversation about choosing not to receive the chalice at communion if you were feeling not well. And then I think there might have been 1 week in which I was the only person that received. I'm actually not sure. I can't actually remember now.
A while ago.
But things had started to change for sure, but it wasn't full out panic yet when I got it. Not yet. And I don't think I made anybody else ill, so something went right.
Excellent. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So lockdown came along, and there you are. You're kind of like, well, we can't go to church this week. What happened? What did you decide to do?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I had to do, having heard the Prime Minister say that everybody had to stay home, is the next day I went and put signs up on the church notice boards outside the church, because St Anne's is usually open every single day. We're very deliberate about making the doors open. We're right on the high street, so you come in and out. And, oh, mine are not barking, but yours are barking. Dogs in both houses. So I went out and looked at the notice boards and thought we need to have something that says the church is still here. So I got a couple of big A3 posters printed that said, the building is closed, but the church is open. Praying at home is still on. Serving the community is still on. Loving your neighbour is still on. And then I added details about what we would be doing and how we would be gathering for worship once I knew what those were.
So what were they?
So I was in a way, I feel like I was quite fortunate. I'd been meeting with like a clergy group online using Zoom for a few months already, mostly in the States. So I already had Zoom, already knew how to use it. And I thought that seemed like it could be a really good way to enable the community to have a sense of kind of virtual community where they'd still be able to see and hear each other. So I just said, go try that. And so that's what we did, and that's what we've stuck with.
That's brilliant. You are the first person I've spoken to in the whole of this experience that knew what Zoom was before
I know.
got locked in the house.
I did feel lucky about that, to be honest. And it seemed like, it's such a simple tool. And my big problem immediately was, I wonder if Zoom's just going to fall over now, because everybody was like, oh, Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's simple enough that lots of people can just download it and use it. It's not just that it's simple from your end to make it work. It's simple to log into, and and has the telephone option, which has been brilliant.
That's right, and I didn't know about the telephone option at the time, and I didn't find out about the telephone option probably until the second Sunday, because I knew how to get into a meeting. I'd never set a meeting up actually, but I bought a kind of bottom level account. I learned how to set up a meeting. The first Sunday, those who had managed to get the word round to logged in, and then somebody else who it turned out had used it occasionally mailed me afterwards and said, "You do know that you can give people a phone access code as well?" And that was like manna from heaven, really, because the big concern for me was lots of the congregation here are older. Many of them are not very IT literate. Quite a few of them don't have computers at all. And pastorally, the immediate thing is, how are we going to enable people to be cared for and to stay connected in this?
Yeah. So, what's your weekly worship pattern? What happens at St Anne's?
So we're in a Methodist Episcopal partnership. We look probably more, we do look more Episcopalian than we do Methodist. Before lockdown, we were running a Sunday service, which would always be a Eucharist. Mm-hmm. It would usually be a choral Eucharist. And once a month, that would involve a Methodist local preacher. And about once a quarter, the service would be a Methodist Holy Communion service. So that'd be Sunday, and then we would also have a midweek communion again on a Thursday morning, followed by kind of coffee and conversation that would be a very informal discussion about what the readings had been, kind of Bible chat, essentially.
Okay. So one of the reasons I was really keen to speak to you was that you're in that different situation. So the people we've spoken to before have all been in, I think, Church of Scotland parishes, apart from Martin, who's been thrown out his parish to go and be the moderator. So, but nobody's been in a situation where there's an expectation that communion will happen every week. Uh-huh. And so obviously, being part of an Episcopal church, that's a kind of different situation to be in, and different things to think about. About that. So what have you ended up with, and then we'll go back and think about what there is.
Yeah, so what we've ended up with is I live right next door to the church. We have Wi-Fi in church. Thankfully, we'd only just got Wi-Fi when this all started, because somebody had given me a Wi-Fi repeater from their house when they moved house, and that had allowed me to extend Wi-Fi into the chancel, really, so that we could allow kids to use iPads and stuff at homework club. Yeah. So I've been going into the church, and I'm celebrating communion on a Sunday morning. Alone in church. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing that on a Thursday. On a Thursday morning, we're mostly doing morning prayer, but we are doing occasional feast day Eucharists that are either being done by my colleague from his home or by me. So there's a little bit of home celebration going on, but mostly it's Eucharist in church.
Okay. And as you said, you're there by yourself, so you're surrounded by nobody, but virtually gathered with your congregation. So
yeah. So what I decided that I would try it again. For me, that it was about what's the pastoral response here. Theologically, I would have to say my background is I would say that's not really a thing. Communion is a thing you do with people, yep. And you don't do it by yourself. Yep. And so my initial gut reaction was, I'm just not doing that. Uh-huh. The pastoral guidance that came around from the bishops was along the lines that they would suspend the prohibition on celebrating private masses, uh-huh. But that you weren't to feel you had to do it if you didn't want to.
Okay.
But what I really most noticed was that folk were distressed, they were frightened, and I wondered what would be best for them. And so my sense of what would be best for them was that they're a Eucharistic community. It's probably what they expect. The church building's important, so the visual of that's important. So that's what we'll do. So I went into church, and what I've done is I've set up a little mock communion table, if you like. I'm using the normal communion table, which is a nave altar, but I've managed to position it so that the camera catches me sort of here, and then what you can see behind me here is a view up to the high altar. So I light the candles. I've brought the Paschal candle down to be close to me, and I've got a surface that is kind of, I stand, but the surface is just at the bottom of the screen here. That means that I can place the chalice and the paten where people can see them. Yeah. And so we've got all the kind of all the symbols that they would usually have, and I robe, and that's how it is.
Excellent.
But it is odd.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, it's odd. It's odd for all of us. I mean, I've been kind of almost completely the opposite of that. I'm sitting in the living room with my t-shirt on, but it's still odd.
Yeah.
It's strange talking to and for me it's odd because I'm filming, so I'm talking to my mobile phone basically, which is really strange. And but you've got a community in front of you. You can see.
Yeah. So I think had it been a question of going to celebrate a private mass and telling people I was doing that, I just wouldn't have done it. I'm not comfortable. Theologically, that's not okay for me. But the fact that Zoom enables me to have a screen in front of me in which I can see there's a bunch of people who are relating in real time, who are watching. I turn microphones off, but I can see that they're praying along the liturgy with me. It means it is real-time relationship and real-time community, and that's the thing that's made it okay for me. Yeah. I've been quite careful not to ask people specifically how it is for them, because I'm concerned that they won't feel able to be honest about that with me. I was really concerned that they would have this whole it's not a very reformed thing to do, is it, to celebrate communion all by yourself and the priest and the people thing. And I was concerned that would be tricky for other people. So I've done a bit of explaining in the service where I explain the kind of spiritual communion concept, which is how Anglicanism looks at it, that we're always praying in the communion of the saints, so we're never really by ourselves, even if we feel by ourselves. And actually what's important is that Jesus promises to feed us when we ask to be fed. Some churches are doing a kind of prayer of spiritual communion where there's a liturgical form of words that they invite people to say. I'm not doing that because I think that creates another difference. But what I am doing is I'm taking the bread before I consume it. I'm saying this is the body of Christ. It's broken for us, and I'm receiving it on behalf of all of us, and we all receive Jesus. And the same with the wine. Because that, for me, that's kind of the crucial thing. Is that what does it mean for Christ to be among us when we're physically distanced?
Yeah, and so I mean, I've celebrated communion. We had a Monday, Thursday communion, and the day that Zoom broke, we were having a communion. The only reason we were on Zoom was to have communion, and it actually ended up, I think there were 10 of us, or 10 devices connected, kind of thing. So we did celebrate communion, but I'd also recorded. So other denominations are kind of fine with people taking bread and wine at home in these circumstances, and they wouldn't have been normally. I think up until 10 weeks ago, nobody really was particularly fine with it. It certainly wouldn't have encouraged it. But all of a sudden, we're thrown into these new circumstances. So, what are the rules around that? So I think what's the denomination said?
Yeah, it's been a bit. I think it's contentious. There's been pastoral guidance issued from the College of Bishops, asking people not to take bread and wine in their own homes. And there's been a lot of lively discussion on clergy forums about what is and is not okay, what is a valid Eucharist, what can you and can't can you consecrate bread and wine across the airwaves, what's going on, all that. And the Episcopal Church theologically is really pretty wide, and so there's a lot of debate about what might and might not be okay. But it's also, like all churches, it's an inherently conservative institution, and the Episcopal guidance is what the Episcopal guidance is. So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I guess I've been on the receiving end as well, because some of the feast days, one of my retired colleagues has been presiding at those, and so I've been sitting on Zoom in my living room while he's celebrating somewhere else, and I have to say I'm not loving that.
Okay.
And so my impression would be that other people would not be loving it either. But what I have been doing is, although I've not been asking the community what they think, I do actually obviously really badly want to know because I kind of want to
tell you now. Yeah.
I really want to be meeting needs. And so what a couple of my pastoral visitors have been checking and have been asking people, how is the experience of worship for you? Are there things that we might be able to do differently, or what would you like to see? And what I'm most surprised about, I think, is that despite all this clergy hassle about, dancing on the heads of pins about what is and isn't a valid Eucharist, people are perfectly happy with what we're doing.
Good.
They want to feel connected. They seem to think that it matters that they can see and hear one another. They're quite happy with the fact that Zoom's quite scruffy around the edges. I've had a couple of very funny, rude things said by people that don't realise they've got their microphones turned on. Of absolute peaches.
Brilliant.
But actually that makes church more real in a way, doesn't it?
Of course it does, because people are just there being themselves, and yeah.
So
I love those kinds of moments. Yeah, you're not all muted at the moment.
Yeah, actually,
so some kind of warning that comes up on the screen.
Well, I had somebody who doesn't usually come to church unmute themselves, and I think they probably unmuted themselves by accident on Easter Day. And so the thing about our Sunday service at the minute is we've got on Easter Day with 50 or 60 people connected into it, and I can't reach my computer easily when I'm at the altar. So I've appointed a co-host who's kind of looking after microphones, but they're looking after microphones and doing church for themselves. And I think they'd not noticed that this microphone was unmuted, and I didn't hear anything, because you don't always hear accurately what everybody else hears on Zoom. I didn't hear anything, but I got an email the next day from somebody saying, did I realise that somebody had released a large expletive right in the middle of the sermon? And perhaps I should think about managing microphones in a different way.
I wonder if it was an expletive that was like, oh, never thought of that before, or what?
I don't know. I did actually I figured out who it was, and and
I'd ask them. I'd have to ask.
They were mortified.
I can imagine. Yeah. And if you'd have heard, you'd have burst out laughing. So
that's the thing, because I think God's okay with that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the really positive things in many ways about the Zoom experience at the minute is people are more real.
Yeah.
And it's quite nice that Mrs. Smith is in her PJs on her sofa, and they've got their microphone turned off in that house because the kids are screaming, and that's fine. And
I mean, one of the reasons that I chose not to do Zoom is because the dogs bark all the time. Do you know what I mean? So it was really practical. We don't have the Wi-Fi in the church is rubbish. They're putting in. We're one of the rural areas that's getting super high speed laid just now. So the open reach fans are all round, but they aren't going to keep my dog quiet.
No.
So
that's been. I've got 2 spaniels, and I started doing offering Compline in Holy Week. And at the end of Holy Week, it had quite a good turnout. I had 25, 30 people coming to Compline. And they said, could we keep it going? And so we've been doing Compline 5 nights a week ever since.
Yeah.
And it's at 9 o'clock in the evening. And I do that from my study. I do it from my chair, kind of over at that side of my study, so I can have a little candle and things, look a bit holy. And the problem is that one of my spaniels goes crazy when a particular dog walks past the house, which happens usually just as it's getting dark. And Compline's supposed to be quiet and reflective.
Yeah, and I guess that some of that moving church into everybody's houses helps with some of that stuff, doesn't it? It kind of, I sometimes wonder about what I had a lovely comment last week. There's a wee guy who's been coming to Sunday school that hasn't come at church. So him and his mum are kind of joining in, and it's brilliant. And his mum sent me a message the other day on Facebook saying, our son had said, where does Stewart live? Does he live in the church? Is he like the Prime Minister? Because you get all that kind of, like, this isn't...
Maybe the Prime Minister lives in a prime and you live in a church.
Yeah, you live in a church. Yeah, it's just kind of like, and folks start to ask those kind of things that, and people see things that, and people are able to join in that wouldn't normally join in. So you've got people that haven't really been to church or haven't been much joining in the same as everybody else has, and that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that has been interesting. I mean, we haven't seen massive droves of new people who have never engaged with church before, but I've definitely seen one or two, real committed, continual engagements from folk who had hardly been before. I've seen some people disappear as well, and it's not very clear why, and whether they will come back.
Yeah.
As and when things change. But also lots and lots of visitors. I think that's been really interesting, is to see it's made consumer church more available in a way, and that's something that I really struggle with, and as part of the reason that I've stuck with Zoom and not tried to do much else that's recorded, because I'm not loving the consumer thing.
Yeah.
But that's, people will choose to come because they can when they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, and I think there was some research, I think it was the Barna Group put out that over a quarter or almost half of people haven't been to church that would normally come, which is really interesting, because anecdotally there was a huge bump in attendance, whatever that looks like, and it's obviously really difficult to know what that actually means, because the metrics on Facebook and YouTube and stuff are so wild that if you watch it for a second, it counts. And that's just somebody scrolling past that hasn't turned off autoplay. They're not really engaging, or they're not really watching. Whereas I think continuing a community on Zoom means that actually it's your congregation, and they're continuing to be your congregation, and that people come and join, but at the core of it, who's there and what's happening. Yeah.
I think, and the other thing I saw somebody posting about on Facebook, a friend who's a minister in the States, linking to an article saying that numbers in many places are dropping off now, and wondering what that's about. And I guess for me, I'm wondering pastorally at the moment what some of the kind of trauma output of some of this situation is. There's this thing in the theory about responses to trauma about, you have the kind of gathering, but then you have the kind of disillusionment phase. And I would guess that if we're not in that yet, we're going to be for it soon. And again, working out how you try and sustain and support a community while some of that's going on, I think, is some stuff that ministers need to be thinking really, really carefully about.
Yeah, and some also at the same time as that, some really interesting stuff coming out about where ministers are probably at in that cycle themselves at the moment, that it's been such a busy and often creative time for folk, but also draining and pastorally difficult, that you can't sustain that kind of level of engagement yourself.
One of the things that I found really helpful, that I've been kind of surprised about, because I don't come out of a very Episcopalian past, as you know, Stewart, but one of the things that I found really helpful actually at the start of the lockdown was that the liturgy carried me, and I really needed that, because actually, again, I think preaching is really important, and it's something that I try and put a lot of focus on, but I just found preaching incredibly difficult. And I decided quite early in the lockdown that I was not going to try and do a big preach on a Sunday, partly because it was going to make the service an hour long, and I thought that was too long, and partly because actually I was really concerned that I would end up preaching platitudes, and I didn't think that was going to be helpful for anyone. So preaching started to feel like it was something that you just needed to not lay down essentially, but to bring it down to what is a really short thought for the week now, and that's part of like personal trauma response of who am I in this, and what is the church in this, and not trying to rush that answer, because you can be there a lot. It's a bit like the thing you do, in Jewish tradition of when you go and meet in the house of somebody who's grieving, you just sit on the bed next to them. You don't need to say anything. Time for conversation will come. Yeah,
and I think one of the gifts of your tradition are those words, that the liturgy's there and it's familiar to people. One of the things that I really loved about training with the Episcopal Church was to hear that and to become familiar with it. And so there are parts of that liturgy that have really stuck with me. and that appear in things that I do now. But it also grieves me that the people that I'm ministering to don't have those words. They don't have that regularity. The only thing that we ever say together with any kind of frequency is the Lord's Prayer. So they don't hear the words of Compline, or they don't hear the liturgy of the Eucharist. Very often we celebrate 4 times a year. So, those are, it's always new, even if you kind of recognise some of it. Whereas, for you go through these seasons where the liturgy changes a little bit, but not completely. And there's something really comforting in that.
The Compline thing's been really interesting, because Compline, I had never said Compline at St Anne's before. But I was casting around trying to work out what I would do to try and recreate some sort of journey through Holy Week for people. And Compline seemed like a thing I could do that would not require more resources than I could offer, and could provide some kind of darkness context, because that's the whole feel of Compline is about acknowledging the darkness and getting ready to be in it and trusting God in that too. And the Compline, lots of people here had never done Compline before. They never said Compline. They didn't know what it was, and they've loved it. And we've got a different psalm for every night, but actually it's very simple. And by now, I imagine we've got less people coming now, but it's settled out at an attendance of between about 12 and 17 or 18. And I imagine that by now, 7 weeks into Easter, they all know Compline off by heart now, I would imagine. And so those prayers, preserve us, O Lord, while waking, and guard us while sleeping, that's going to be internalized for them now. So that's been really, really interesting. And it does it in a way that's really able to acknowledge the hardships that people have been feeling.
I think that's one of the things I love about Compline. For me, that's if I was going to pick a liturgy, Compline would be it. I think that it speaks to all kinds of feelings in a very simple kind of way, but it does acknowledge that it's dark. Of course it's dark, and the morning will come, but it's dark, and God will be with us in the dark, and that's okay.
That's okay.
But it gives you. It's a bit, I suppose, any liturgy is about vocalising together how we feel, and how we feel about God and where God might be, and all of that.
Speaking of vocalising, so I'm turning the tables now, asking questions of you.
Go on then.
Awkward shuffle. What are you doing about music?
We're not.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a relief.
Yeah, I decided early on that. Well, 2 things. I think, firstly, we don't have the license, so we'd have to go and buy a license to stream music. So we could have done that, and we still might. We haven't really decided. We kind of had a chat about it a couple of weeks ago, and people are missing the music. So I think, realistically, I think at some point fairly soon we will start to include some music. But the other kind of thing that, I said I was sitting in the living room wearing my T-shirt, so I don't generally do that on a Sunday. I still tend to wear a dog collar every week, and I don't always robe, but occasionally I do. For things like communion and baptisms and things like that, I would always tend to put on my robes, or at least my cassock. So moving to my living room felt different, and I didn't. I kind of wanted to make that distinction, and I'm still not very sure why, but it felt different to me, and so I thought, well, if it's going to feel different to me, then it's going to feel different to everyone else, so let's just go with the difference. So what I've been doing is a kind of very short, well, not very, sort of 20 minutes, but hello, setting the theme very quickly, the reading, a shorter sermon, and a prayer with the Lord's Prayer, and then putting anything else that might come at the end. So partly that's about recognising that people skip through videos, because we've been doing stuff on video. So it's kind of front loading the things that seem possibly the most important. And then, so the notices come at the end, whereas in church the notices were always at the beginning. So I moved them to the end because the 1 week we did put them at the beginning, the drop-off rate and the viewers was kind of like, what is this? You know, I don't care that there's a quiz on Friday night. Why are you telling me this? So yeah, the music's been really, really missed. And the week Zoom broke, I did use some music in the Zoom part of the celebration, and people were really, really moved by it.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll bring some music back.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I kind of wondered, and I've asked a few people about this, and I think I'm guessing for you, this is an easy question because actually not much has changed. So when people go back to church, it will be the same as it's been all the way through because you're celebrating the Eucharist using the liturgy. But for me, if people have joined in the last 10 weeks and then come to St Ninian's on a Sunday morning, it's not going to be the same, which is a real kind of quandary, you know. So, you know, am I creating something that's different? Am I introducing people to the community of the church? Or if they turn up on Sunday morning, they'll be like, oh, what on earth is this? Who's the guy standing up there with the dog collar thing on? He's not the guy that we saw. He's
not the guy that was in his living room.
Yeah. And so, that's the thing I'm wrestling with at the moment. How does that look? Or do we just continue doing both? Which I think is
that's a realistic question for us just now. So, you know, on a good Sunday at St Anne's, we have about 40-ish people there. And of them, it's an older congregation, you know. I probably have got 3 or 4 people who are below retirement age. So actually, even if we're allowed to reopen the building fairly soon for socially distanced services, there's quite a lot of the congregation are unlikely to feel comfortable coming back at that point. And because we're Eucharistic, we're not going to be back to being Eucharistic anytime soon. And I think that does raise the question about what is it going to look like to try and combine those things. And for me that's a problem actually, because the way that I've managed to set things up on my shoestring, but the way it looks to anybody who'd be sitting in the church for the shoestring is not going to be appropriate for a service.
Yeah, and you can't have your laptop sitting in front of the chalice. That's not,
So all of a sudden you're looking at potentially, you know, can you spend money? And actually the answer for us is no. We just don't have any money, so we can't spend it.
We record, we kind of audio record, and we give out CDs, and we had been starting to post bits of the service as an audio file on the website. So we have that facility, but it's old. You know, the sound system went in 14, 15 years ago, so it really needs replacing.
Yeah.
But, you know, as soon as you start talking about that, you know, even just for the audio, you know, it's big money. It's a lot of cash. And
our church has not long been refurbished. I arrived at St Anne's just as a major refurbishment was completed. And so we've got quite a nice sound system, but it's quite a stripped back sound system, you know, looking at quite a traditional way of doing church. And we're not going to be able to update that realistically. And the phone thing and whether is interesting as well, though, because the one week that I did record things because Zoom broke, you know, I came home and put a reflection and some prayers online and uploaded that to YouTube, and then mailed it round. I did get different feedback, and quite a lot of that was positive different feedback. So people have been positive about Zoom on the one hand, but they also like the notion of being able to kind of pick it up again and have another listen. So maybe there is something to be said for, you know, for audio recording and giving that a try.
We've got people that work shifts, so they've been loving the video because it means, you know, as you said, they can pick that up anytime. So you know, if they're working on Sunday morning, they can pick it up. We've got folk with kids that, you know,
I've had that too. Folk with kids doing actually this is better.
Yeah, I can watch this once I've gaffer taped them to a chair and whatever it is that you do to children.
And a youth worker coming out there.
That's it, to make them quiet. Just
Yeah.
The corner and be quiet.
Yeah.
So what do you think then that looks like for you? So going forward, you've got this unknown, vague kind of roadmap of easing that may or may not at some point allow us to open, but probably not fully, and certainly not sitting anywhere near each other. And as you said, as in a Eucharistic community, that's going to feel really, really odd. So would you? So one of the questions that's floating around just now is: do we just wait and the church remains closed until everybody can come and it's back to something that's close to normal, or do you open up and allow some people to come and serve them the body with tongs, wearing gloves and a mask? Is that does that feel that can't feel right, can it?
That's not feeling very well. I mean, it's feeling Christ-like in the terms of looking after your neighbour, but it's not feeling much like communion. Yeah. I don't have an answer to it right now. I guess I'm interested that we're talking just as stage 1 lockdown's being undone, if you like, here. So I've not had my first socially distanced meeting with somebody that I'm kind of really missing and would like to give a big hug to. Really, I might brave going to visit my mum and sitting in her garden for half an hour over this weekend, and I might have a better idea about how I think unlocking might work after that. Because I think one of the big risks is that actually it might not be as fantastic as you think it is, just to see something or to see somebody, and to not be able to do what you've longed to do in that space or with that person. If I've been longing to come back to my church, but actually it's going to feel not like my church, and if I'm longing to receive communion and I'm not going to be able to receive it in the way that feels intimate, then perhaps it is better to wait. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Especially if you've been used to choral service too, and it looks like singing is going to be one of the last things that we're going to be allowed to do.
And music on Zoom is difficult. Music doesn't play well on Zoom. So I experimented for Easter with could I get a pianist in their house playing the piano over Zoom, and it just sounded terrible. I've once or twice played something pre-recorded, and that works okay as long as your connection's okay. But pre-recorded is kind of soulless in comparison to. So we have been singing, but I'm singing a cappella. And inviting people to join in, so you can imagine. And we're just starting to experiment a little bit with that. So I've got a really good clarinetist in the congregation, and we've worked out that actually woodwind, individual woodwind instruments, actually Zoom picks up quite well. Yeah. So we've had a couple of instrumental things in now.
I guess it's because it's as close to a human voice and in terms of music. Musical instruments.
So we have done a bit of musical. I've taught a new setting of the Eucharist while we've been in lockdown.
Good. So one of the things that you can't tell on Zoom, you can tell who's muted, but you can't tell who's muted you.
That's right. And that's probably a blessing for everybody.
Yeah. This big, you look for people going like that. Yeah. That's a sign.
Yeah. So I don't know, but the singing thing is the one thing, or the music thing is one of the things that I'm wondering, do we need to branch out into a different technology to provide some of that resourcing? Because I think for people's spirituality and their discipleship, as the time goes on, actually singing matters. Yeah. And perhaps we do need to find a way to facilitate that better for people, whether it's a YouTube playlist every week or whatever else.
Yeah, it does. It matters in ways that I don't think we really even understand sometimes. I think that the stuff that really resonates with people and the power of that. I mean, I had used a couple of really old hymns. I mean, it was like Love Divine or something like that, and folk were crying. It was a really emotional response to hearing church music, which. And from people who would generally say, "No, I don't really like that," but because as you said, because they've been deprived of it for 12 weeks now, it's something that I think people don't quite. It's like everything else; you don't quite understand how important it is until you can't do it.
And I think as well that very often, this might be a comment about my preaching, I don't know, when you if you think about or ask people what they remember from church when they're walking down the street on Tuesday morning, chances are they might be singing a hymn they sung on Sunday, but they're not probably mulling over the finer points of your exposition of the gospel.
I can't often remember what I said on Sunday. Yeah, but you're right. Music does, it works in a different way, doesn't it? It sits in our heads differently.
And I think also in a time when life's tricky, again back to trauma responses, how are you going to, most people probably are needing some processing space that's not about words.
Yeah. You have, this is an entirely different question. You're sitting there with a vest top on. You have the best tattoo that I have ever seen. I love your tattoo.
Do you like my tattoo? So this is St Cuthbert on a missionary journey. It's from Bede's Life of Cuthbert, which is at Durham, and that's because Cuthbert's my favourite guy.
Why?
So I think a lot of my faith story is from this part of this, like sort of Dunbar down to Lindisfarne and across to Berwickshire where I grew up. A lot of my personal story is tied up in that place. Mm-hmm. Cuthbert's story is kind of tied up in that as well, and it just kind of resonates, that thing of kind of going out and being sent out to proclaim good news and it being an adventure and a bit tricky, and and
in these times, that's a really difficult thing, isn't it? The kind of sense that, I wonder, one of the things that we've done is kind of, in some ways, consolidate, isn't it? Your first response is, how do we keep going all the things that are important to us? But as you said, part of the job, part of our job, is to be missionary. So what does that look like in these kind of circumstances?
I mean, the name of the podcast that you chose, I think, is really good. This thing of like Control-Alt-Delete. You've pressed reset. What happens? What starts up? And I suppose what I've reflected on is that what has started up, for whatever reason, has been keeping a regular community focus going. A rhythm of prayer for the community through Compline, a rhythm of prayer that actually we didn't have together in that way. That those have been the two really important things. But the things that we have lost most easily and that we really need to get back on for us have been some of our other engagements. So, for example, we have a youth club that runs in the church for primary school age children. Uh-huh. There are kids that have got no other contact with church, and it's not been possible to maintain contact with them. But there's some intermediate, like if I see them in the street, then that's fine. Yeah. But we've not been able to do anything to gather them. And most of them wouldn't have the resources to be able to do the sorts of things that we could offer to them. Mm-hmm. So trying to work out what we do with that, trying to work out how we've done good, like other places, we've been involved in community resilience teams and that kind of stuff. We've got a debt advice service, and that is continuing to try and offer support. But actually, the sense of connectedness of those things to the faith community and how they're rooted in that, I think is less clear than I would want it to be. And mm-hmm. And I wish I had some answers about what we're going to do with that and how we're going to make that possible. We're almost exactly the same. We've got a community resilience group that is actually a church committee. Technically that's what it is, because when we set it up, it seemed much more straightforward just to do that than it was to set up a separate entity. I mean, why would you do that? Yeah. So technically it's a committee of the church, but nobody knows that, and they don't need to know it in some senses. The community they just need to know that they can phone somebody and they'll come and help them. So ours is kind of the other way around. We've the community resilience team here has been set up by the community council, but the community, several of the key players in the community council happen also to be church folk, and so they're intimately interlinked. Yeah, and they are they are being good news on the street, but there's not a very clear link back to why. Yeah, and you'd want that to be clearer, I think.
Yeah, I had a fascinating. I don't know if I've said this already in the podcast, the very first week of the community resource group, which got off the ground very, very quickly and involved a phone number. So I had the phone, right? So I got the phone because the person who was supposed to have the phone actually wasn't here. So I had the phone, and the very first person that phoned was somebody who's a member of the church. And I'm kind of like, hiya. Oh, I wasn't expecting you. And I'm like, right, okay, yeah, great. What can I do to help? Can you pick this up? I need to get, I think it was a prescription. And I said, well, why did you phone this number and not Why didn't you phone me, or your elder who lives round the corner, or somebody else? And I didn't like to bother anybody.
I've had exactly the same experience.
It's
So
a fascinating thing.
this is the community resilience phone number here, and I had the phone ring, and somebody who was around church for a while and had kind of fallen off the edges after a bereavement was on the other end of the line. They live very close by, and they were looking for help with their garden, which is one of the things the community resilience team will do, no bother. But I was like, what? Why is that? Why is that easier? So
yeah, it's a
big question, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask it at some point. I'm going to have that conversation with the person and say, "Look, what was that about?" And I think in some ways they won't know what that was about. Just not apart from not being a bother, which is a kind of different thing. There's this perception that everybody's running about and we're really busy and there's no time for anything, or completely the opposite, that we're all sitting out in the garden in the sunshine not doing anything. And I suspect that now the truth is somewhere in the middle. I have a feeling we were all a bit panicky and a bit busy at the beginning. But it feels as though, do you feel as if it's kind of settling into some kind of new rhythm, or do you still feel a bit, I don't really know what this is?
No, I've definitely settled into a rhythm now. I've probably settled into a rhythm that's not as healthy as I'd like it to be, and I've probably got some recalibrating of that to do. I guess it's a small charge that had very little in the way of appropriate structures when I arrived, and so quite a lot of my job has been to help them to regrow some of that. And the inevitable thing in that is that when the structures are not yet in place, the temptation is that you pick up and do the things. So I'm the church office here, for example, and one of the things that we did in common with lots of other folk is start putting out a newsletter. So we've been putting out this every week, which is 8 pages of stuff that's intended to go further than just church stuff. It's intended to be a community resource that gets a bigger readership. But that's probably a day a week to put together. It's a big job,
Yeah. So how does that go out? Does it go out in paper form? Does it go online? Both?
It goes both. I'm posting / delivering in the region of 25-30 copies, and I've got an online distribution list of about 130, but it also goes up on the website. And when it first started, basically I went out with if you'd like to receive this, please let us know, and that got quite wide across the community. So one of the things about a wee congregation is we've only got a very small role, so that's actually quite a lot wider than the role is at St Anne's. And so that's good in itself.
That's brilliant.
But it's still a big job.
So has the website been important? I meant to ask when kind of all the way back at the conversation around liturgy. How did the congregation get the liturgy? So have they all got their wee book at home, or?
So I've one of the things that made the timing of lockdown from a liturgical perspective was just absolutely terrible. Lent, Holy Week, Easter.
Yeah.
How many liturgies could you possibly need? And if you're going to amend them slightly so that they're nice for people, rather than we'll flick through that bit just now because we're not in church. There was a lot of rehashing liturgy booklets, and what I've been doing is for people that get the newsletter physically, they get it posted to them. People who get it online can print it for themselves and they can request a copy. I was putting Facebook events up, but then I stopped doing that because of concerns about security on Zoom, because I don't really want Zoom bombed if I can avoid it.
No.
But there are Dropbox links to liturgies as well. So the idea is that if you want to come to a service and you want the liturgy, then you'll have a paper copy of everything we use.
Brilliant. Good stuff. What about pastoral stuff? You said you're kind of your concern is pastoral. So there's a community support stuff. There's obviously a limitation on you. You can't go and sit in someone's house and have a conversation with them. So how's that been? It's been okay. It's been so I suppose pastoral work here goes 2 different directions. There's an inward-looking pastoral work that is about the community that you see on a regular basis or on a less regular basis. But there's also quite a lot of pastoral care goes on around the fringes of the youth group, for example, and families there
many of whom have got tricky circumstances. And we've an ecumenical youth worker in the town who is really well connected, so I've been doing a bit of work with him. The internal looking pastoral work, I've got a pastoral care team, and we've split the congregation up into 4 sections between us. So we've each got a group of people that we're phoning and hooking in with. And if someone else has concerns about somebody on their list, then they'll give me a ring. I have done a little bit of socially distanced standing on people's doorsteps, but I felt, particularly at the start of lockdown, there was quite a lot of potential locally for kind of shaming of people for that kind of behaviour. So I felt like I needed to be quite careful about that. It's a bit less like that now, and people kind of want to see you on the doorstep a little bit. And I think you can be sensible about that, without putting people at risk. I guess, again, like other people, I guess pastoral need seems to have morphed really quickly and sometimes in surprising ways. Some of the older people that I might have expected would really struggle have actually flourished and are now like, oh, we don't really want to unlock. We've found but I think it's partly, they've got the internal resources because they've been through stuff. Whereas the mental health needs that I've seen pop up have mostly been younger people. And people struggling, but often people struggling with kind of combining home, job, homeschooling. I mean, what a perfect storm.
I'm so glad I don't have to do that. So glad.
Yeah,
because and the expectations are massive around all of those things, aren't they? That that you're actually going to be able to work at home and be productive in an environment that people aren't used to working in. And we generally work from home and have some experience of the chaos that can be, because you can be sitting down doing something and the phone goes, or somebody comes to the door, or something happens, so you don't get the same kind of it's not the same situation as sitting at your desk at work. It's just very, where all of the interruptions are related to the thing that you're supposed to be doing in the first place, as opposed to all the interruptions are not the thing that you were trying to do ever. But they all demand your attention. You can't just say, oh, I'm really sorry, I can't speak to you just now because I'm trying to write a sermon, or whatever that might be. So I have loads of sympathy for people that have found themselves trying to work while their kids are bombing about, and
and I think that raises questions for church online as well. How does the church help in that rather than becoming another thread of that problem? We've been talking about, we run an ecumenical holiday club for primary school children here, usually in the last week of the summer holidays. And we don't really know what we're going to do with it this year. We are definitely going to run it. We're definitely not going to run it with 60 kids in one hall. But we've been talking about, how do you go about making it clear that you want to be available and you want to be helpful and you want to be of service to the community without going, we want you to be on Zoom for 3 hours every day that week.
One of my friends is very early on, he had fairly recently started or restarted a boys brigade company in his church. So he's only been there a year and a bit, maybe 2. So he kind of re-established this company in Leith with Anchor Boys and Junior section, and so they've been doing Anchor Boys online every week, and it's absolute genius. But it's on Facebook Live, so it's like him and one of the other leaders, Neil, they kind of share between them who's doing it this week. They started off doing socially distant Anchor Boys, so the two of them were in the hall, kind of staying apart from each other. So one would film while the other one was doing their bit, kind of thing. So now they've roped in their partners, and so they're at home and they're still trying to do all this stuff. And it's brilliant because you can join in if you want to join in at the time, because it's Facebook Live, so you can leave comments and you can say, oh yeah, how does that work again? Oh, I've lost my craft's not working, that kind of stuff. And they've been playing games and they're doing all that kind of stuff. But if you can't do it at that point, you can join in later on. So there's that kind of oh, we're here now, but also you don't miss out because you couldn't be there at 6 o'clock on Wednesday night or whenever it is. And I kind of wondered whether that might be, we have the same, we've got a holiday club due first week in August. I'm kind of thinking that might work. We've been doing Sunday school on Zoom, which has been great.
Yeah.
And really for the kids, it's been brilliant, you know, to know that once a week they're going to see their friends and that they're going to be able to have a bit of chat and play games.
Crack on with it.
Yeah, that kind of join in if you can, and we'll tell you what you need for tomorrow for the craft and all that kind of stuff. But it's brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant.
So I think
again, it's getting past yourself, isn't it? It's that kind of like, right, so we're doing this.
Well, we're really we're hopeful that because restrictions seem to be easing, that we'll be able to do something that's got a bit more out and about in it at the end of the summer. So our idea at the moment is to put together resource packs. We've got some funding that would mean we can deliver a pack of resources to each household that's signed up. And then we're trying to think about whether we can identify things to do at specific locations. So one of the things we're talking about is putting a cairn maybe in, or getting the kids to build a cairn during the week in the garden at St Anne's, and we'll send them off around some other places, and we'll get them to do a scavenger hunt, that kind of stuff. And maybe just using some online format to tee it up, to give a bit of a Bible story, send them off to have a laugh, and then maybe some kind of roundup. Just so it's like.
And they can send you pictures or video and stuff, and you can share that in the group. And
also maybe engagement levels. So, you know, like, I don't know, is it Live Lent that does or it might be the stewardship like 40 acts of kindness thing that they do for Lent. That's usually there are 3 different levels of engagement. Kind of recognising that for some families, actually, it will be helpful to have a structured thing that you can go all out all week with. But for some families, it will just be meltdown. You could spend 5 minutes on this, or you could spend 6 hours on that.
Yeah. 5 minutes is too long.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, you know, that level of engagement. Even I was chatting to somebody about homeschooling the other day, and they're kind of like, you know, at the start we're kind of like a timetable for the day, and I think you've only got one child. You don't have 30 kids to round up and to all get on the same page at the same time. And then, you know, it's not going to take all day. You know, and they spend half the day doing other stuff anyway. They eat and they go out to play and they, you know, they move around, and, you know, like, you know, actual schooling, you know, doesn't take the whole day. You know, if your kids are doing an hour of stuff a day, they're probably doing as much as they've been doing in school, and that's not being critical of, you know, particularly primary school. You know, secondary school I think is probably a little bit different, but, you know, if they're getting by, you know, doing some of the stuff, then great. But actually, you're in the middle of a trauma. You know, just calm down a little bit and just.
Well, and I think that's key, really. That's been my approach for myself, I suppose, and therefore I'm like, well, if I think that as a grown up who hopefully has got a relative level of self-awareness, if I'm realising that today I'm feeling tired, I need to not worry about the thing that I think I should be doing right now. I actually maybe do need to sit in the garden for an hour and, you know, watch some trashy TV or whatever it is. Then actually we do need to give that space to our young people as well.
So if everybody's coming up with these, I've taught myself Chinese, and I've you know, learned ninja skills on watercolor painting or something like that. Is there something you've tried?
I've tried 2 things, and neither of them been particularly successful. I have had a go at teaching myself to crochet. Oh,
brilliant!
No, really not brilliant.
Not brilliant.
Not brilliant. But, you know, it took me out my head for a few hours, and that was what I needed to do. So I had to go at that, and I've had to go at watercolor paints as well, which is.
There you go. See.
So I think I'm not going to be taking a job of anybody who's a painter anytime soon, and I'm not going to be crocheting any items of clothing anytime soon either, which I know will be a big disappointment.
I'm just picturing.
Please don't.
Brilliant. It's still sunny. It's not dark yet. So thank you so much for coming in out of the sunshine for a chat. It's been brilliant to catch up.
Really good to catch up with you too. Thanks very much for having me.
So good to see you.
Shut up and sit down.